your fire burn. Let your fire burn.
Now, what's funny is, and I don't know if funny is exactly the right word, when I envisioned this show, when we started talking about it a few weeks ago, and granted, yes, we know we're a little bit late, but obviously there's been, I don't know, something minor coming up in the world here lately, but when I originally envisioned this show, I figured we would be talking about something non-topical that I had seen online in a bunch of arguments, and I thought it was actually a good topic to discuss with you. And that topic being, where do rights come from? And it was interesting seeing how each one of the groups, and these were fairly liberty-minded people, some of them very...
What groups are you talking about? You going to step back for a minute?
People that consider themselves libertarians,
okay.
Anarchists, basically those that mainly are in the liberty movement, but we're having a discussion about where do rights come from, and that it may sound maybe silly on the onset, but I think it's a question that bears a little bit of answering. And then we had this massive outbreak of coronavirus and what have you, and I think it would dovetail nicely into that discussion. Now,
okay.
Before we get into the stuff that has been plaguing our news feeds and our news, see what I did there?
I have a feeling it's going to be a long recording session today.
Quite potentially, when you're stuck in the house, as much as I have been, unfortunately, yes, it probably will. But with the rights thing, before I say anything, I kind of want to get your take, so I don't potentially, I don't know, muddy the waters or do anything or try to influence you.
Okay, so what are you wanting from me?
Well, $1 million.
Where do rights come from?
Yeah, where do you think, and this is not a yes, no, right, wrong, black and white thing, but for you, the entire liberty movement is based on human rights. In fact, I would argue that society is based on human rights, or at least it should be, the society we want to see. But for you, if someone was going to ask you, where do we get our rights from, what would you say?
Oh, that's such a broad question. I'm sorry.
Is it because we're human? Are they God-given rights, or do they come from someone else? Does government grant us our rights?
Well, again, it depends on how you approach the question. I mean, if you are looking at our government versus others and where do those rights come from, then obviously, yes, some of them are granted by the government within the societal construct that you live in. If you're asking just in the more hypothetical sense, where do we get our rights, or where are they born of? The only thing I can really say is I think rights in general, and forgive me guys, this is a completely cold question, so I haven't pre-thought about this at all.
Surprise!
No, it's fine. I haven't had a brain workout since, quarantine started, so it's good. I don't know it. Well, hold on. I don't know if there can be a solid answer to that. I think rights are things that any person, regardless of age, origin, socioeconomic status, what have you,
they possess.
Not even possess, but because every word I think of is like a roadblock. Can I say, or is it something they're entitled to, or should hopefully have access to as a human being? That, I guess I could put it that way.
Well, let me ask some probing questions here. Okay. One of the things you said was that maybe I misunderstood you, that rights may come from government. Do you think that if rights come from government, that it can be as egalitarian as you wanted? Meaning that it's equal across age?
Well, of course it's not. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
It depends on the way in which you are asking the question. So where do rights come from is so broad. In certain societies, there are certain rights afforded to people, whereas in others that is not a right afforded to people.
Okay. I like where
That's
this
what
is
I'm
going.
saying.
So, and sorry to jump in there. I'm trying to lead here.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
So would you say rights come from the society in which you live, not necessarily from the government?
I think there are times that is the case. If you look at any societal construct around the world today, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, not everybody had access to, in an equitable way, the same things.
Can society decide to revoke your rights?
If you get enough of them together, I think they can.
Can, or are they justified? Maybe that's a
I
better
wouldn't
word.
say it's always justified, no. I mean, if you're going down to the same basic principles that we've discussed many times over the course of this podcast, should they be justified in being taken? I guess it depends on what your actions have been as well.
Right, and that's a very good point. Keep in mind, if I murder someone, then I have given up, at least in proportion to my crime, my rights.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, but could society unilaterally decide you no longer have the right to life, I'm putting a gun to your head?
Taking away life, I think, is a drastic measure. But I mean, we are emotional beings, and I can say that now, not having anyone that I am in that circumstance with. But man, I can tell you, anybody ever hurt my kids or my family, all bets are off.
Right,
You know?
and in that case, you've got someone that has given up a proportion of their rights in proportion to the crime that they have committed. This is more of a unilateral thing where, and I don't want to necessarily jump right to Corona. I want to stay on this just for a moment.
No, you're fine.
But, for instance, Italy has decided that if you're over a certain age, because they can't treat everyone, we're not going. They're deciding who lives and who dies.
Well, but again, you can't make unilateral decisions for everybody in a circumstance like that. They are essentially in triage mode right now.
I understand that, and I'm not faulting them. These are just questions.
No,
This is
I
not a right or
understand that.
wrong.
I'm just referring back to what you said. When you said discussing unilaterally, you can't. There's so much that goes into a situation depending on the circumstance that goes in. I mean,
Where I'm going with this, that actually lends credibility to what you're saying, where society has, let's say in the case of an emergency, the ability to revoke all of your rights, including the most basic right, which is a right to live. Now, I hate to even say a right to live, because that, if it's a positive right, then you get to demand services, products from someone else, which would be the case here. But
when you have finite resources and they are your resources to give or distribute, then at what point are you inhibiting upon the person's rights to distribute as they see fit?
this is a modern day trolley problem, is what it comes down to. You've got an elderly person on one track and you've got 5 healthy people on the other track. Which one do you allow to die? Right. And I'm not, this again is not a right versus wrong. I wanted to get your take on it. Now, where a lot of the argumentation came from, at least within these circles, was where the rights come from. Are they God-given rights? Well, if you're going to state that claim, then you have to believe in, of course, a God, or at least some supernatural extra entity that exists, that has the ability to confer upon you and everyone else these rights. Some say, and God, I don't know why these guys were in these particular discussions, but they believe that rights come from government. The government dictates it. Now, I'll take you off the hot seat, and I'll put myself on it. I don't think that rights really come from anywhere. And what I mean by that is that I can't say it's because I'm a human. I can't say it's because I'm metacognitive Oh, good Lord. I possess metacognition.
There it is.
Metacognitive. Whoo, that's the word I was trying to go for. Good Lord, that's a tongue twister. But I can make all these assertions and say, this is why I have these rights. But how do I back that up? What proof do I have? What logic, what reason gets you there? Now, the reality is, in my opinion, and I've delved into this with my atheist background, because morality, of course, if you're an atheist, you have no morality, at least that's what people will say. And if you're an anarchist, you have no ethics, because, of course, most people think that government is where ethics come from.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you solve this? For me, rights, ethics, even morality, if you want to use that word, I would argue are emergent properties of society. That societies that value human life, societies that value cooperation, for instance, are the societies on a long scale that do the best. Obviously, if you don't value human life, people are not going to procreate the way that they do in a society that is secure and they know that their offspring are going to be secure in.
Right.
So in that case, we've learned as a society, whether you want to say, maybe even culturally, that if I harm you, even outside of the existence of a legal system, the likelihood of people that care about you seeking revenge or seeking retribution against me is going to be very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, even if I don't hurt you, but say I steal from you or I violate contractual law, meaning you pay me X number of dollars to perform a service and I don't perform that service, that is going to ding my reputation and cause me to go out of business or have other people not dealing with me. So from that aspect, I don't think we necessarily have any rights, or at least they're not given. It is a construct within society. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to violate them. Now, the entire liberty movement is built upon the understanding of these rights and the adherence to this construct. But hell, let's just say some aliens came down, or maybe there's some creature we find in the deep that is actually metacognitive. Good God, I'm struggling with that word today.
Well, you just say the M word.
The M word? They're
Just
going
the
to think
M
I'm
word.
saying motherfucker. Because that's usually my M word, let's be
Well,
honest.
why don't you just use that one instead, since clearly you can say that one, but you can't say metacognitive.
Okay, so we find another creature that's motherfucker.
That's a motherfucker. Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
All right. So for the rest of this, if I say another creature that's a motherfucker, you know what I'm talking about.
There you go.
But, and we look at them and say, no, you can't kill us. We have rights. Do you think it's going to fly? Fuck no. They're not going to care. And that's what I mean. It's not like the laws of physics. It's not like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which is something that exists regardless of who is viewing it. For
Right.
instance, it's non-subjective. Rights are not. So, with that in mind, and I knew we would never be able to discuss this for an hour, but I find it very interesting overlaying that with what's currently going on all over the world.
Right.
And before we shift into that discussion, what did you think about what I say? Do you agree, disagree, think I'm full of shit?
Well, no, I don't think you're full of it. In this instance.
Score one for me, guys.
No, like you said, it's an impossibility to have it unilateral. Mathematics is absolute.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same, as you said, across the board. Anytime you are dealing with anything within the human race, I think we are, in a large part, for lack of a better analogy or metaphor, we are a large gray area. So much is dependent upon circumstances, the people involved, the history. I mean,
No,
there's just a lot of things that go into it because emotion is a factor.
It absolutely is. And one of the biggest emotions we're seeing right now is fear. And that's,
Fear or denial.
both of them.
Yeah.
And the two together make a particularly bad mix. But let's say 2 months ago, 3 months ago, before this washed up on our shores, or at least as far as we knew, I don't think people would have been okay with a complete government shutdown of a bunch of businesses, or a government saying you can't go here, you can't leave your house. In New Jersey, for instance, after 8:30.
The shut-ins.
The shut-ins, the quarantines, the shelter in place, all these great words that have these fear connotations built into it so that you swallow it easier. But you mix in the emotion, like you said, and suddenly logic is flushed down the toilet, which, along with all the paper towels and other stuff that people are having to use in lieu of toilet paper.
Yeah. I'm going to say there's a small subset that's fine with toilet paper. For the next 8 years, fine with toilet paper.
Yeah.
And then you have my house of 4 people. Down to 3 rolls going, okay.
Here's your ration of TP.
Literally having to go to my youngest and say, okay, if you're going number 1, you only need 2 little squares. Fold them in half, clean, because she's one of those, just pull it, let it roll, wad into a ball. So it's having to kind of retrain our thinking. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Less waste. So
absolutely. But seeing this fear kind of rise up in the American public, and it's all over the world, but obviously we don't live all over the world. We can only look at what's coming out on news, and most of us are pretty suspect of what we see online, but you don't have to be very smart in order to realize what's going on. All you got to do is go to a grocery store or go to a Walmart or whatever your version of it is there, with people robbing toilet paper out of someone else's buggy.
Yeah.
Not their purse, their fucking toilet paper. And I agree, it's kind of a necessity, but when this first started, my first thoughts were, shouldn't you be stocking up on food? Because if you don't eat anything, you're not going to
have to worry about it.
Exactly. But that's not what...
No, the first run was for toilet paper. Yeah. It was interesting the first time I made it to the store, once the initial rush. Because, and our house, we do a decent job. You and my husband work, together, and you guys have done the planning and things like that before. Emergency scenario planning, I guess I should say. So, we have a store of canned goods and some... dry goods, things along those lines. But, and at the time I was still working days and didn't have to worry about a lot of that other stuff. But the first time I did make it to the store, of course, this was at post the first TP run, so I automatically knew that wasn't there. But it was odd seeing what was gone. At that time, there was still meat and stuff on the shelves, but
no toilet paper.
But no toilet paper.
Or paper towels.
But canned soups, still full. Rice and stuff was gone, which, okay. But like canned beans, things along those lines, still plenty to choose from. All the tomatoes, canned tomatoes were gone. It was just this weird balance, like looking around going, who... Okay, clearly nobody taught you to prioritize here what you need. But, the ramen, all gone.
I still can't get over that.
Right. But, for a lot of people, though, I think not most, but I think there's a large number of people who aren't familiar with cooking anything outside of a pre-designated instruction box. And, ramen is add water and microwave.
If it doesn't say preheat oven to 350 degrees, cook for, or place in microwave for X amount of time, most people are lost. And I'm not bagging on those people. There are a lot of them that don't have the time. Not
only don't have the time, but had never been in a situation where I think with any sense of realistic expectation felt that this was something they would ever really need to know. Mm-hmm. I think you get comfortable with complacency and the assumption that everything will always be available because we've lived in a society for decades now, where if you need it, it is there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a sharp learning curve for a lot of people right now, my kids included. They're getting irritated with me because I'm not letting them go and just grab whatever they want to eat to snack on all the time. It's just one of those where we don't know how much the supply chain has been impacted yet.
Or will be impacted.
Or will continue to be impacted. So it's just, are you really hungry right now? If not, great. Get a drink of water. And you can wait till dinner.
Or the thing I've been facing with mine is they're used to being able to go, open a package, eat a little bit, open another package of something else, eat a little bit. And you've got all these open packages. And once you open them,
the clock starts ticking.
The clock starts ticking, absolutely. And trying to get them in the mindset that, no, we're not opening. I just got back from the grocery store. You're not opening every single container of stuff that I got to get a spoonful or to get a handful of whatever's in it. We're eating one thing all the way through its completion and prioritizing based on the date that it's going to expire.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough. And I can only imagine how many people are out there that have never had to cook or never been exposed to this. Now, if you grew up poor, which I did, and this isn't a woe is me kind of thing, I'm actually kind of grateful for it right now. And I know that sounds stupid, but I immediately, and as you mentioned, your husband and I have talked about this over many beers over the last few years. I went back to the staples that were given to us while we were on welfare. And I'm old enough that there was no such thing as a WIC card. It was, you get a sack of flour, you get a sack of beans, you get rice, Karo syrup, and government cheese, and that's about it. And they would mix a few other things in it, maybe some dehydrated vegetables, soups, like you said, but a lot of it was stuff that could store for a very long time. And you had to learn to make something different with this stuff constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you begin to value the seasonings. You can begin to experiment with different ways, which is good. But seeing people load up on carts of ramen noodles, for instance, which have almost no nutrition value whatsoever.
It's not just the ramen noodle side of that for me, though. I mean, it's the extreme levels people are hoarding items. And it's not just the people who resell, like the guys who went, they dropped had 17,000 bottles of antibacterial stuff to sell for think they had some bottles they were selling for like 30 or 40 bucks a bottle.
And what's funny is what you just said. This is a virus.
Yes. And it's antibacterial. Yeah, I know. I get it, believe me. But now that people are starting to go, oh, hey, yeah, this is important. Like, I went out and got a big 25-pound bag of flour. We make our own bread. We do things along those lines here at home. And initially that was there. And so I said, okay, this will be enough to get our family through, probably at least a month if we were baking really regularly. Mm-hmm. But I don't need to grab 4 or 5 of these right now. And there was not, even at that time, a ton of them. Just I was at Sam's Club, so, a lot of the larger stores and things come through and they'll get the bigger bags. And then the next time I went through, of course, everything's completely gone. Mm-hmm. But then those are the people that are coming through in just their regular carts, and they are grabbing 4 bags, and they are grabbing the maximum amount they can fit of these. And I saw a lady with 3 of those big flat cart, what are they, pallet carts, carrying these things out. And it was just, and I can't speak. I didn't know for sure who she was. Obviously, maybe she has a very large family. I don't know.
Or maybe she runs a restaurant.
Maybe she runs a restaurant. I, again, can't speak for that. But in general, there are people that are going out and just, buying as many of these things as they can. And I get the knee jerk, but, I'm also trying to consider, other members within my own family that also need to go out and shop for their families and their kids. And while, yes, I absolutely support getting the materials that you feel you need, grabbing the excessive amounts, like the people who are getting all the toilet paper, obviously, and things like that, I just have a hard time justifying that in my own mind. There's not much pasta left anywhere. So I went shopping this morning with my husband, and there was only like 3 little things of pasta. So we have the whole wheat and then the regular protein. So we grabbed one of each and left the other ones on the shelves for those who may need them. So it's just, it's interesting seeing the directions that it goes. And maybe, maybe I am being foolish and not stockpiling enough for my family for a 3, 4, 6, 12 month supply.
And hopefully it doesn't come to that.
Hopefully not.
But
I can't turn off that button in my brain that says, do we realistically need all of this at this point? No. And do we have enough? And I think you and I, both of our families are in pretty decent shape as far as being able to survive on staples. There are, again, a lot of people that if there's not a frozen lasagna or frozen pizza there, they're not going to know what to do. If it's not a boxed dinner, they're screwed. Mm-hmm. Now is the time, in my opinion, to start developing those skills that are necessary. And we've never been faced with trying to survive. Again, if you grew up poor, especially when you were young, you're closer to it there. But even then, it's most times you have a roof over your head, you've got running water, you've got electricity. So it's not even, and we're not even at the really bad point. What scares me is seeing how people are reacting and are just going batshit crazy. And I can't figure out why. Is it because they fear for themselves? And again, I can understand that. Survival is hard encoded into most of our DNA. That's our prime directive, is to get our genetic material into the future. But this is going beyond survival. Now, again, are you going to be rewarded for being altruistic? No, not necessarily. I think you should absolutely, if you can, maybe provide for your family and help them out, try to get what extra, but it's a hard decision. Even when I go to the store, it says you can take, I think we're on a limit of like 2 eggs, for instance, 2 dozen eggs. Okay, whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, don't go to that store. But even then, my knee jerk is to get the maximum that I absolutely can, but then I'm torn. What about the next guy? Mm-hmm. There was probably maybe 18, maybe 20 containers of eggs that were out there. If I grab these 2, that's one less for someone that may not get off of work today till after 5 o'clock. But again, is my survival more important?
That again, the gray area where it comes in with people, the logic versus the emotion of it. So, I mean, you're asking why people are doing this. It may be stupid, but every time somebody asks me something along those lines, I always think of that quote from Men in Black, that first movie with Tommy Lee Jones, when
a person is smart.
Right, he asked him, he's like, well, what, people are good people. Why don't you just tell them what's going on? And he's like, well, a person is smart, but people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. And I think, even when I saw that movie the first time, I was like, wow, that's really true. When you really start digging down and thinking about it, a person you can talk to, a person you can reason with most of the time.
You can, and I think a lot of where the fear comes from is you do not know how the other person is going to react. And
well, the fear in general, but this one is we don't know not just how people are going to react, but we don't know what's coming still.
Right, yeah, and that's part of what I mean is that almost 100% of the uncertainty, I'd say at least the vast, vast majority of the uncertainty out there right now, whether it be the markets, whether it be going to the store, is you don't know how your fellow humans have behaved at that store. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you're going to have the necessary goods. The supplies are not in less supply. I guess that's the only way you can say it. The demand has severely outpaced the market. So you've got this artificial, I don't know what you want to call it, this artificial gravity that's been applied, and it's causing people to overbuy stuff that they normally wouldn't, and the supply chain is trying to compensate. But right now we're at war with ourselves, really and truly.
No, I agree.
And the actions of our fellow human beings are going to be more dangerous than this disease. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not making light of it. Even though it's got a very high survival rate, it can severely damage the lungs and the ability to process oxygen for anyone it infects. So again, not making light of it. But there was, and I can't remember who asked this question, but he was going around, he was asking people about living in an anarchist society. What would you do if there were no laws about speeding and all this stuff? Well, I would be worried what my neighbor is going to do. I would be worried that someone's going to come and rob me, steal from me, kill me, rape me. And then he looked at him and said, what's funny is that's the exact same thing your neighbor said. Everyone fears the actions of each other. So we invent this construct called government, which is supposed to be an impartial third party, and then fail to realize it's full of people. And then give them the right. Right's a bad word, my apologies. They have the power to harm us with impunity. So in order to fight what may or may not happen from a neighbor, we make something absolutely sure is going to happen from our government. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
It does.
A lot of this fear, I think, would go away if we had the ability to get to know the people around us. And then again, I'm not going to lie, there's some people that, if I got to know, might increase that fear.
Right, but I mean, now with all the quarantines and things going on, we have a unique opportunity to get to know each other at a distance.
Absolutely.
And engage in conversations in a relatively safe, quote-unquote, manner.
And what is another great opportunity, and I guess we'll go ahead and segue into this here. We're going to do something a little bit different for our commercial break today. Instead of singing the praises of Anchor like we usually do, we're going to talk about other podcasts within the Liberty Movement community. One of those that we have worked with closely, especially with Nick Picone, is Peace Freqs. And it's actually spelled like frequency, Freqs, but you can actually get to their website using the other version of Freqs. This is and for those of you that listen to a lot of podcasts, used to be Sounds of Liberty, but they have recently rebranded. He and his co-host Lizzie, that he's married to, spend a lot of time interviewing people that are within the Liberty Movement and are trying to develop a community that are no longer taking part in this culture war. And it really is a culture war. You've got the Republican right with the culture of war. You've got the liberal left with the social justice and what have you. And neither one of those movements focus on the individual. So if you get an opportunity, especially during this quarantine, because I think we'll have lots of opportunities to explore new things, check out Peace Freqs. They're a really fun podcast. I enjoy listening to it, and they have some really insightful guests on there, which would be a great way to get to know other members of the Liberty Movement community.
No, it's definitely a site and a podcast you should check out. You know, anything that gets people talking and listening to the ideas of others and perspectives of others, obviously we're always 100% behind. So, I'm thanking you. Sorry. I thank you for making sure that we got the other podcasts mentioned. That's something we don't get an opportunity to do very often or have not taken advantage of. Then I'm glad to see that we're starting to do more.
And I think it's important to help build this community because a lot of us exist like these little islands out on the ocean. And as many of us like to joke, but it's not really a joke. It's like herding cats trying to get anarchists and liberty lovers together because there's no flag or no banner that we rally to other than individual liberty and freedom, and that only goes so far.
Yeah. No, that's very true. You know, you mentioned something a few minutes ago regarding the power being held within governments. With the current situation that we're in right now, with the spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19, is it COVID or COVID? think it's COVID-19.
You're asking the wrong person on how to pronounce stuff.
I'm more just kind of thinking out loud.
Okay.
It's like, oh, that didn't sound quite right. But, you know, we are in a societal construct currently that responds to the authority of government. And with the situation at hand, I mean, they're trying to put these mandates in place and they're recommending people stay quarantined. But, you know, like we are in the middle of March right now. It is spring break time, and you've got situations where the positive cases are exponentially growing each day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have situations like the one down in Miami right now where the beaches are completely packed full of the majority being younger, 20-somethings down trying to enjoy their spring break and not really taking any of it very seriously. Where
they're practicing social distancing. I assure you, there's no one kissing random people they just met 10 minutes ago and getting into these little hotel rooms and partying. That's just not happening.
Of course not.
Take it back.
Okay, sure. But, you know, there is a time now where, you know, if we're not going to be following, you know, what's going on in Italy right now. I mean, they're a small example of the dangers that this virus really represents. I mean, if you look at the numbers we're recording on Saturday, March 22nd, and as of the numbers reported today through the New York Times, let me actually double check this really quick. They reported just today they've had an additional 793 deaths in one day. It is by far the highest number of single day deaths they've had, which puts their overall number
in Italy,
dead.
right?
This is in Italy, yeah.
Okay.
So that puts them at nearly 40. They have over 53,000 recorded infections, and that puts them over 5,500 dead, which has raised the rate of death for this virus now is climbing up over 8%. So it's a scary thing. You know, they've actually surpassed China as the country with the highest death toll and have kind of become the new epicenter of this whole thing. But when
Isn't that due largely to the fact that I think the word you used was triage, where they're just letting people die that are over a certain age or have certain underlying medical conditions?
There is that circumstance going on because they're having to prioritize what materials and medicines and equipment they have available.
So, and that's what I'm trying to get to is that it's not that maybe Italians are more susceptible to it.
No, it has
It's
nothing to do with that.
Or that they, and I'm not saying they handled it correctly either, but a lot of the death, I would wager, is due to the fact that their medical system is overwhelmed.
Completely. And that's, I think, the point a lot of people are missing. They keep referring back to, well, yeah, you know, the odds of me dying from it are super low. It's not a big deal. It's the fact that because this virus has such a high communicability factor, I mean, extraordinarily high. And you can have one person spread it to hundreds before they're even really symptomatic. Is what makes this so incredibly dangerous. And the fact that when you are spreading it to people in a very short amount of time, that means you have an exponential increase in the number that's infected that reach that point of critical medical needs around the same time. And then you have the floods hitting the hospitals.
Yeah, if it was highly communicable but had a incubation period of, let's say, like 24 hours, this disease would be less problematic than it is now because you can cause a lot of damage.
Right. And I think you have like a 10-day period somewhat
Incubation.
where you are, contagious without even realizing you're spreading this to other people.
I don't know how many days, but it's too many. So on the flip side of this, though, Korea seems to be doing a much better job. Do you know what the difference is?
I think they jumped onto the response a lot faster. And that's kind of what I was talking about, where and I know we talk a lot about, you know, taking the power away from government, but the way things are right now, this is the societal construct that we have where you need to have that government step in to get people to go inside their fucking houses. I mean, at this point, they're not rationally thinking enough as an individual level to respond to this. And that's one of the things that happened within Italy is that it was very kind of a piecemeal pullback.
I'm going to say no.
Okay, and that's fine, and that's why we have these discussions. I'm just saying where things are structured currently with people responding so ardently to that big brother figure. I mean, it's like your sibling telling you, hey, you should stay inside, versus your dad coming in saying, hey, sit your ass down, you're done.
The only difference there would be the CDC has recommended it, and you've got state and local governments that are saying you can only gather in groups of 10. But in the face of that, with the article you just posted, people are ignoring that, and that's coming from the government. So they're not responding. But the problem is...
But they are in the areas where they've got these shut-ins and stuff, which I'm not recommending that. Don't take it as me saying, oh, the government needs to step in and bring in martial law.
That's what it sounds like you're saying.
I'm not going down that line. I'm saying that the response to how serious this was, and this was... In Italy, at least, they're the dog chasing their tail. They got the tail chasing the dog, or whatever the phrase is. Which one is it?
Oh, tails usually don't chase.
You got the tail wagging the dog. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Go.
Right. Where they're constantly kind of running behind the virus.
Yeah, it's like a snowball running down the hill, and you're trying to catch up, and it gets bigger and bigger and faster and faster.
Right. And that's what's kind of happened there, is that they were... what is that? Reacting in it. They were reactionary as opposed to being proactive.
Correct.
And that's the difference with South Korea, is that they stepped in, and it wasn't just the government taking control. Like right now, we're relying on that for the government primarily for our testing kits and things within the U.S. South Korea did away with all that, brought in private companies saying, hey, you find a way of testing for this, go. We will get it printed, we will get it produced, whatever we've got to do, and we will get this taken care of. So that way they are testing all of their people. Those that are testing positive are immediately quarantined.
Okay, there's a couple things we need to unpackage. One, here in the United States, we're not relying on the government to provide the testing kits. The government stood in the way of private companies.
That's what I'm saying.
Producing
yes.
the kits. So the argument that Big Brother needs to be involved is counterintuitive. Hold on, let me finish all this. And I know you're not saying government needs to be involved in all of this.
No, but I am saying that, with the amount of information that they have available, I mean, you have South Korea's government that is stepping in and behaving in a proactive way, where you had the Italian government behaving more in the way that the U.S. has, where they are reacting to things as opposed to getting proactive and getting ahead of it.
And I agree with
that. That's
that.
what I'm saying.
So that... for our listener here, the thing that Korea did that was remarkable is there were no barriers to producing the tests. And they are able to test at a significantly higher rate than the United States. And I think I've actually got, I've got the statistics right here where South Korea has already tested more than 270,000 people, which is roughly equivalent to 5,200 tests per million inhabitants. United States, 74 per million. They can't produce a test. But the other thing that South Korea did is, instead of doing massive quarantines where no one can go to work, no one can do these things, they went to a diagnostic style of treating this, where they were very quick to identify people that were sick and remove them as opposed to everyone else. Because let's face it, if you're at home and you have it and you don't know you have it and you're in there with your family, you just infected 3 or 4 more people, as opposed to knowing you have it and you going to a hospital and not infecting all these other people. And that's the major difference.
Right.
But they had a, I don't know if you remember this, I think it was the MERS virus. They had a catastrophic response to it several years ago. And they learned from it. They absolutely learned from it, was that what we need to do is identify the people and remove them as contaminant or infection vectors. That's the word I'm looking for. They wanted to remove as many infection vectors as possible, but the economy still needs to roll, because it takes money to treat these people. It takes money to produce toilet paper, as we're seeing right now.
Right. I've done a terrible job explaining this clearly, but this is all kind of off the cuff. So forgive me for not having this delivered in the most organized way. For me, this is the society. These are the societies that we have right now, and the response to it from the powers that be currently is what's making a big difference here. We have 74 tests per million
versus
inhabitants within our country. But hey, the good news is all of our athletes and celebrities are totally tested whenever they want to. And that's become, I think, one of the new ways of gaining likes and listeners is, hey, I tested positive. But I'm extraordinarily frustrated, and we talked about this a little bit coming over at, there are people being turned away because there's no available tests who are high-level communicators. Is that the word for it? Or
communicators?
I don't know. Not communicators. They come into contact with many people.
Okay.
I don't know how else to phrase it.
They're very large contamination or infection vectors.
Okay. That sounds much more scientific. Thank you. But they're being turned away even though they are displaying symptoms that very strongly resemble, and saying, well, hey, just go home, come back if it gets worse. Which along the way going home, like you said, they're infecting their families. They're infecting anyone they come into contact with on their way home because there's not enough tests. Yet,
Right.
Hey, if you have the right social status within our country, hey, we got a test for you because of who you are. And that's extraordinarily frustrating for me.
And I don't know if you saw this already. A few minutes ago, before we started recording, I saw that Rand Paul has tested positive. One of the senators. Again, I'm not saying anyone should be denied testing by any stretch of the imagination, but what we're prioritizing seems a little shitty. But
that's indicative of the status of our country, though. You don't matter unless you have a certain number of followers. You have these fucking YouTubers that are going out and they're able to get tested and like, hey, I'm negative and this is great. And look at me, I'm self-isolating with my mansion. Great. You guys have the means, locations, own the property enough to self-isolate in a very comfortable fashion without needing to go through all, you know what I mean, with all of this, whereas you have people who, due to their socioeconomic status, live with many other people in close quarters with other families and other people that are very close, where you can exponentially spread this highly contagious virus that is, quite frankly, very dangerous.
And these are typically people that can't afford to be off work and are very likely to spread the disease to their other coworkers.
The prioritization
But here's my problem
of
with
this is insane.
And I am in 100% agreement with you in that I think we're testing the wrong people. But I don't think that you and I sitting here have the ability to make that determination. I'm not going to say that there should be a, air quote, impartial third party determining who is getting it.
No, it's a difficult call.
It is because, who determines? I think, Tom Hanks, for instance, has just as much right to it as I do. Because again, if we're looking at the fact that a human versus a human versus a human, we're all equal. Now, obviously, there's always going to be some disparity in that. What I don't like and what fucking pisses me off is the amount of time that the companies needed to wait petitioning the FDA, and I can't remember if the
going
CDC,
through the bureaucracy of it. Yes,
going through the bullshit bureaucracy just to develop a fucking testing kit.
I agree with you. You can't say who deserves it more than other, but there needs to be a certain level of prioritization. Again, for the people who are going to be in a position where it is spreading much faster. Check our healthcare workers on a regular basis. The people that you need in place. I don't know.
Here's a sticky one that I just thought of, and I know how much you like the sticky ones, but as a society, let's say in the society I want to live in, and I don't think you can necessarily answer this because you and I have differing views of what we were at, but let's say you've got these people that are more at risk that, of course, can't afford the testing. Should the rest of society be forced to pay for these tests for the people that cannot in order to protect the rest of society? Be forced?
Oh, that is a tough one. In order to protect the greater good, I mean, that justifies a lot of atrocities. So I think
Utilitarianism is
I think that's a
shitty way to
very
do.
dangerous slope. Is the idea of it grand? Sure. But here, the thing is, in circumstances like this, I think a lot of people discount the greater good of others.
Yeah, just like with the grocery store. That's why I'm tying this in.
Right. That there is, if that is a circumstance, my gosh, we have more means of helping others today than we really ever have before, even from a distance. You've got the GoFundMes, you've got the charitable contributions that you can make. Especially, God knows how much everybody's saving right now, not going out and doing their normal social
Did you
things.
see, you're bringing up crowdfunding. Chelsea Manning got released. And they crowdfunded all of her legal bills and fines. And they were able to get, and I want to say it was almost $250,000, somewhere around there. And don't quote me on that, but I know it was substantial, in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that she could be released from jail. I know this is not corona related, but it is related to the fact that there is some good that is coming out of this.
Yep.
And to answer my own question, I don't think the rest of society should necessarily be forced to pay for this testing. But I'm willing to bet that in a truly free society, at least a society that I would want to live in, it would be hard to not convince people to say, hey, you know what, when you're checking out today, you want to add an additional $2 to help test other people. Mm-hmm. Or like you said, crowdfund, because it is in our individual best interest, because the more people that are removed as infection vectors, the better off we all are, and the safer, potentially, that we all are.
This is the scary thing, though, the response to it. It took a little bit longer to hit here than other places, and
we're in the Midwest, so who the fuck wants to come
well,
here?
Not even just like here. I'm saying the U.S. in general. It was hitting places in Europe and China, and it was spreading. They had the opportunity to learn ahead of time, and even now the response is just has severely lagged behind it. But I mean, God, you look at places like South Korea, who I think many would look at as not being as quote unquote possibly as advanced in some ways, which I disagree with. But
I was going to say then they don't know South Korea.
Right.
They are kicking some serious
That's what I'm saying. I've been
on the world stage.
They are, absolutely. It's one of those, though, where I don't think many people have paid quite as much attention to that,
which
and
is
look
sad.
at it as being more
look at, and I'm not trying to insert this, but this is a good a place as any. Look at the difference between North and South Korea. Mm-hmm. There was a time in the 50s, late 40s and the 50s, that was one country. You couldn't, I mean, the similarities almost don't even exist other than in language alone.
Right.
Just seeing the economic change and the change in the culture in South Korea when they got a taste of freedom.
Yes.
Especially economic freedom. Sorry, I'll get off my
No,
soapbox.
you're fine. That's an interesting thing for another episode, I think. But again, I think people have such a narrow view and look at the U.S. and that whole America attitude as,
true.
we're the best, we're the top. That's what I was referring to. And looking at everybody else as though they must be behind where we are. But look at what they've done. Those numbers alone on what they've been able to accomplish in such a short time versus where we're at now, where we're looking at the numbers climbing. A week ago, there wasn't a state in the country that had above 3 figures in infections. New York State right now has over 12,000 inside of a week. Like, if that's not saying something, I don't know what is, and we're still,
I'm
chasing the trolley, I guess. I don't know.
I'm laughing, and God, I'm a morbid son of a bitch sometimes, but I have to wonder if there's some conservatives out there that are gleefully watching these numbers, because the places that are hardest hit have typically been Democratic hotbeds. Now, there's no correlation there. I'm not saying that anything like it, but the places that are hit the hardest are typically your larger urban centers. And larger urban centers typically have more Democratic leanings because of the amount of poverty and the amount of government necessary to run these things. So you have to wonder if some of these people aren't, wringing their hands and going, there's going to be less votes for Biden or Bernie, whoever it ends up being.
Or maybe more. I don't know. Because they're... But again, we're going back to the bipartisan thing. It's just, am I personally scared of catching this? I think you are ridiculous if you don't have a level of...
We're all going to get it or get
Right.
vaccinated one way or the other.
Right, in some form. For me personally, I worry about it. I'm asthmatic, and this is a heavily attacking respiratory virus.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if I were to catch something like that, it scares me a lot. And I've got 2 small kids, so children and elderly obviously are among, I think primarily the elderly, which, man, that's another thing in Florida too. That's a very high
Exactly.
retirement community.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got a massive horde of people who are just going to spread the love.
Well,
But
maybe now there'll be Social Security left for all of us. Sorry, I told you I was a morbid
you are a morbid son of a bitch. That is true. So, I don't know. This whole thing with me, I'm not looking at this as being something like from Contagion or Stephen King's The Stand. I mean, this is not a global...
It is a pandemic, but it's
It's
not...
a pandemic, but I mean, this isn't like a 90% death rate
It's not a
deal. No. But it is, I mean, if you want to talk about trial runs for biological, contagions, we're not scoring so high here. And
No, we're
it's
not.
a frustrating thing to see. And that's where all of this is coming from with me is the venting on all these things that I'm looking at happening going, my God, learn from the circumstances around us, take it, remove some of those bureaucratic blocks that are preventing, these private industries from being able to help.
What's funny, and you and I have talked about this, and I want to make sure that we address it with the listeners. If you follow the page and you've seen the memes flying through, but watching the government remove restraints from the private sector in order to get the private sector to perform the most efficient way possible, it's funny because it's like you are admitting that that you are putting limits on how the free markets could work. You are the
And you're surprised? Of course they know.
I'm more surprised that they're almost admitting it because they had to remove it.
Well, they're backed into a corner at this point. That's why.
What do we got to do to keep them in that corner is going to be the next question. I hope, out of any of these emergencies, let's say it's Patriot Act coming out of 9/11, government does not relinquish power. Maybe we as the people need to no longer relinquish the power and say, fuck you. Like here in the state of Kansas, Jesus Christ, you can get liquor curbside now. Mm-hmm. Just to keep these businesses afloat. That's the coolest flipping idea I've ever heard, and that's coming out of Kansas.
Yep.
Where we have some of the most restrictive, and not as bad as Utah and Oklahoma, but we have some of the most restrictive alcohol laws that are still out there. But seeing that government is removing some of these regulations that have been impeding us, we're sitting in a situation where there's not going to be any school for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think we're still the only state that's done that. Completely closed schools. Now, they didn't cancel the school year.
Right, but they're not going into
education,
school building
right,
anymore.
Right. We've talked before. I have a friend that teaches, and I've kind of been texting back and forth, like, so what's the plan here? And the thing is, they're not requiring anybody to go in, and it doesn't count towards the grades, but they are making all of the materials available, making themselves available, and opening up that online, community learning factor, helping if parents have questions and want materials and so on and so forth. It's a pretty cool thing. In our neighborhood, we have one of our neighbors who's a teacher, another who homeschools, and it's kind of cool. We all talk. Our kids are around the same age, and we've talked about, we each have 2, ironically enough, but pairing up by the grade level to see where we can supplement and help each other. You got to imagine how much of that is going on right now, where you have this community education that's kicked in.
Be still, my beating heart.
Right?
Suddenly, the American public is learning the value of being a prepper. of homeschooling, of not relying on the government to provide these services that they stole the money for at gunpoint. How many people are going to remember this? I don't know. But I hope it's enough of a wake-up call for this generation and my generation, Gen X. I mean, we should be the people leading the charge here. We know better. We do know better.
Well, I'm not a Gen Xer, so.
I understand that. What I'm saying to the rest of them that are listening, because I know they're got to be out there, we're the most pessimistic assholes in the last probably 80 to 100 years. We distrust everything, and yet we're going out to vote. We're putting these people in power. We're allowing them to have power. Now is the time to seize it back. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, I can't stress this enough. If you get the opportunity, check out Peace Freqs. I'm going to leave a link to their show in our show notes. We thank you for spending some time with us. As always, we really enjoy the opportunity to sit down with you. We wish we could do this more often. And who knows, if they do shut down the whole state, you may see a shit ton of episodes popping out, because I guess as long as you and I can travel to each other's houses and actually record, we should be able to do that.
Well, even then, I think we can go over the, like, that other apps and stuff to let us record, so. Yeah,
there's always Zoom, but I can't thank you guys enough. A lot of you have been rating and reviewing the podcast. We're seeing great growth. So from the bottom of my heart, I do thank you for every download, every review, every like. If you haven't subscribed or had a chance to do that, do us a favor. It only costs you about 1 minute of your time, and it will help us get our message out to everyone else. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Later.
Always look back over your shoulder. Make no run to make your move. Don't hold back, come on and get down to it. Live your life the way that you wanna.